Hi, I'm Ryan Bracken, Chief Product Officer at DroneSense. We provide a comprehensive drone software platform for public safety, and we're excited to be talking today about DFR.
Hey, I'm Matt Sloane, founder and CEO of SkyFire Consulting. We are a public safety-focused drone consulting company, and today we're going to be talking all about DFR, drone first responder, and drones for public safety.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg from Pilot Institute. We train drone pilots all over the country.
Hi, my name is Haye from DroneXL, where we cover all the drone news on our website.
Welcome to the latest episode of the PiXL Drone Show, our weekly podcast where we talk to industry professionals about what they do in the UAS space.
From professionals who use drone to fly inspection missions to public safety users or even drone light shows, you will learn on the PiXL Drone Show that drones are much more than just toys.
So, how was your week?
Week has been
me?
pretty good.
How was it doing the show for me?
It was interesting. It was funny because it made me rethink how I would record videos, and basically what I ended up doing was kind of like just figuring out what I was going to say and then prep and then just say it, which of course results in having to re-record segments a bunch of times. But it made me look into using a teleprompter, and I think that's what I'm going to do for short news video clips going forward. So it actually triggered me kind of figuring out a different way of working, which I think will be beneficial.
Yeah, so I do a prompter, but I don't read from it. I just do bullet points from the prompter, so I know what to talk about, and I just kind of expand. But well, thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it. I think the feedback was really good from people that watched. So
it was fun. I tried to make it a little funny with a little humor in there since you weren't around. So
yeah,
it was
that
good.
worked out well.
Yeah. So who do we have as our guests for today?
Today we have two guests, which is fairly rare in general. I have my coffee getting delivered to me. Look at this. Thank you, Don.
Oh, wow.
This is the first time I'm drinking coffee in like probably a year and a half or 2 years maybe. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, so people better buckle up. This is going to be an entertaining show.
my wife loves seeing me on coffee because I'm like super hyper. That's why I don't drink coffee, because it makes me very jittery. But I had a long night because the kiddos are still on French time zone. So one woke up. Yeah, he went back to bed at 6 p.m., fell asleep without even me seeing it, and then woke up at midnight, came into our room, and he's like, hey, I'm ready, I need my breakfast. And I was like,
I want to play.
It's midnight. Yep, so that was fun. So he was up from midnight.
I know what it's
like.
He
was up from midnight until 3 a.m., and then he fell asleep at 3 or 4 a.m. I don't even know, because then I just stayed up, basically. So that was fun. So I need coffee this morning. But anyway, let's talk about our guest. We have two guests. Let me put up my notes here. And I'm actually pretty excited because we're talking about DFR, drone as first responders, and we kind of talked about this before with Divi, and we'll have actually Divi on the show as well again from Paladin Drone, and then and so our guest today is Matt and Ryan, and Ryan is from DroneSense, and I actually see Ryan is popping out right now, and
he's already here
with you, Ryan, and. Yeah, and Ryan is with DroneSense. We've met Ryan a couple of years ago, actually, in Texas, and they have an amazing software that they use for first responders. And so we'll talk about this. And they've been adding the DFR, drone as first responder, as an option recently. We saw a demo when we were in Texas, and it was really impressive. And we have Matt Sloane, who's the CEO of SkyFire, and they're also doing stuff with DFR. So both of them will have I think a great discussion talking about all that stuff. So
awesome. I'm always happy when we can talk about drones as first responders and drones being used for good, because I think that's a story that we can't tell and share enough. So we have coffee, we have two guests. This is going to be a kick-ass show.
I agree. Let's bring them on. All right, and it's time to welcome our guests to the show. So we have Matt Sloane. Matt is the CEO of SkyFire. We just kind of talked about what you guys did, and we have Ryan Bracken, who is the CPO, and CPO is the Chief Product Officer for DroneSense. And welcome both to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
So, Matt, let's get started with you. Tell us a little bit more about how you got into drones and then how you became the CEO of SkyFire. Again, I was reading about SkyFire, and there is actually more. You do a lot more than just one company. So I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that background.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I spent 14 years as a producer at CNN, most of it in medical news. And, I sort of decided in 2014 that I wanted to try something else, try something on my own. And after I had left CNN, I was still freelancing there, and they had asked me to come speak to a group of public information officer trainees about how CNN covered major news stories. And the day before I gave that talk, I had gotten my first Phantom 2, and I said, "Hey, by the way, we have these drones now. So it's not just a reporter, with a satellite truck and a microphone that you have to worry about, but we've got these flying cameras." And I had 4 fire chiefs come up to me after that talk and say, "Hey, how do I get that for my department?" And that's actually how I got the idea to start SkyFire. I pulled in 2 of my close college roommates, one of whom was an attorney and one of whom was a serial entrepreneur, and just said, "Hey, you want to do this with me?" And then we brought on another partner who was a flight instructor, and he knew all the aviation side of things. And then we just kind of, we started getting out there and talking to people. And what we found, in those early years was that we were pretty early on. And, we felt like, we don't really know how this works yet, but nobody did. So we were figuring it out as we went. Over the intervening years, I've since gone and gotten my private pilot's license. So now I understand the manned aviation side as well. And then, we've grown from there. So we've worked with, 500 plus public safety agencies to get their programs started, police, fire, emergency management, dabbling a little bit in emergency medical services. We've gotten an opportunity to do some really cool stuff over the last 8 years. And as you mentioned too, we have 2 other sort of parts of the business. One that does drone manufacturing. So we're manufacturing our own aircraft now. And then we also do a lot in the oil and gas and engineering space as well too. So we've got some folks who focus on that.
And we'll be talking about the drone definitely later on. So, yep.
Great.
Yeah, this sounds like you have a lot of experience there and a lot of things we can tap into in this conversation. Switching to Ryan, he's the Chief Product Officer of DroneSense. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started with DroneSense?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people in the drone industry, I started with radio-controlled airplanes and helicopters. From a young age, was just crazy about flying things. I ultimately became an aerospace engineer, started building my own RC airplanes and crashing them. In fact, I don't know if I've ever had an RC plane, but it did not ultimately crash. So this is one of the things that's been really exciting about the drone industry. In fact, just yesterday we had a company meeting where we walked through some of the history of drones. My brother and I, Philip Bracken, he's also in the kind of aerospace industry. We tried building our first drone. It's probably 06, 07, when you had to compile your own code and put all these sensors together. We could never get it to fly right. And then we saw some of those drones coming out. You had 3DR and DJI coming out with these amazing drones. And at that time, I had moved to the FBI. I was a special agent in the DC area with the FBI. And we began to see the operational impact or possibilities of drones. And the whole thing that's exciting there is that the drones now fly themselves so well. Some of these drones are very reliable, very high quality. The links are fantastic. And so that really got me excited about the operational component of drone use. So I met Chris Ihorn and Gerard Juarez, our co-founders, actually at Quantico as a part of the FBI. And I was so crazy about what they were doing that I ultimately left the FBI and joined the team in 2018. And that's been really an extraordinary experience for me. My role has changed over the time. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Product Officer. I'm also the Chief Information Security Officer because somebody's got to track the security side of things. But it's been a really interesting experience. Of course, our company has grown. We've been hiring a lot lately. But we have a platform that provides what we would call comprehensive situational awareness to drone operators and to public safety on the ground. So it's been a great experience working with Matt, and really pleased to be part of the show.
So I know you guys have been working together. Can you tell us a bit more about how you guys met and how you've been working together in the drone space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, I don't even know how many years anymore, but probably not worth counting. I was actually introduced to the DroneSense team by Coit Kessler, who was at the Austin Fire Department at the time. And he said, "Hey, you got to look at what these guys are doing. This is so cool." And he introduced me to Chris Ihorn, and we started going down that road. And then obviously once Ryan came on board, he and I have worked very closely together. But one thing I'll say, because Ryan is too humble to say it about himself and about the company, is it's just great software. I mean, we've had hundreds of agencies that we've signed on to the DroneSense platform, and with very few exceptions, they just think it's a fantastic product, and it really it meets a need that we all have. I mean, aside from making money and selling great product, it's public safety guys are out there all day long just trying to do the best job they can, and they need the right tools.
I was going to say thanks a lot, Matt. I've slept on Matt's couch. During that was the Atlanta Super Bowl. It was a busy time. It was an extraordinary success that Matt and his team pulled off, and we were grateful to be part of it. But I think over the years, this is a challenging industry. It's changed a lot. There's been a lot going on, and Matt and the team at SkyFire they've been almost like family to DroneSense as we've navigated these difficult challenge that we all experience in the drone industry. Mm-hmm. So it's been a lot of fun to work together.
Yeah, I think that's something that's definitely specific to the drone industry. Like, it developed so quickly, and people were discovering all these new use cases for drones so fast that everything has been catching up, right? Organizations, the FAA has been catching up, and I feel like the last 5, 6, 7 years, a lot of it was just figuring it out as you go. I have a question for both of you, but let's start with you, Ryan. I mean, can both of you tell us who are your customers? Who do you cater to, and where are they geographically located?
So our customers are largely public safety. We are very focused on public safety, and that includes law enforcement, fire rescue, emergency management, as well as what we kind of call the second responders, people who are there to restore your power and cover other types of events, environmental disasters. So we have a cross-section of both government as well as commercial customers in that kind of segment, and they're located everywhere. All across the country. We have several overseas now, and it's really been an extraordinary experience for us. We talk a lot about government, well, particularly public safety, is a fairly small segment of the overall drone industry. And why are we so focused on it? And the satisfaction we get from working with these customers, it is unbelievable how generous they are with their feedback. How they're out there trying to save lives, and we get to support them. And what's fantastic, and I know Matt would share this sentiment as well, is it's amazing to watch them share with each other. There's just something almost viral about it's a new drone. They all talk amongst each other and then say, oh, and suddenly something rises to the surface. Same thing with, of course, our software. A new feature comes out. You see them talk about it and used in ways you can never imagine. So, yeah, our customers are fantastic.
Can you give us a use case scenario, Ryan, for what DroneSense can be used for? I remember seeing a presentation in Texas where you guys were, I don't know if it was you or if it was one of your customers actually, talking about how there was a group of cars that was on a parking lot at night that they were going after. Do you remember that example? Can you maybe talk about this and how the software was used in this kind of operation?
Sure. Greg, that was, I think that was Austin Police that gave that presentation. But there were several agencies involved. And this is probably the number one, most powerful part of DroneSense is collaboration. Very few public safety operations of that scale are done by a single department. So, just a little bit about DroneSense, the platform. We have a flight control application, as well as a real-time operations capability where you can live stream video and see geographically where people are. Then we have the admin side. And then we'll talk, I'm sure, at some point today about drone as a first responder and our DS remote capability. But what was done there was you have a bunch of pilots from different agencies out there supporting this operation. Hundreds of people, very large-scale operation. And there's news about it, so I'm sure maybe after we can get some links for that. But I think the overarching goal was to safely address this very large crowd of potentially criminal activity. So several drone teams were used. They all streamed the video into a single source. They use what we call their mission sharing. So they're all operating from the same platform. Everyone can see each other's locations, video, and not only that, they're able to use polygons on the map to carve out areas to say, okay, Austin Police, you have this area, this parking lot is yours. maybe Texas Department of Public Safety, you have this area, or other, operators there. So the nice thing there is that you're able to kind of componentize the work in the operational areas, but then in real time, see if somebody's flying outside of their area. So you can see their drone get out of the red area, maybe they're responsible for. You say, oh, shoot, let's change altitudes. Let's do something to avoid a collision. So I've personally witnessed with my own eyes this save interagency collisions in real time, because they can see they're at the same altitude, they're getting really close. You make a quick radio call and everything's averted.
So then switching back to you, Matt, who are your customers? Who does your organization cater to?
Exactly the same customers that Ryan's organization does. Same thing. Yeah, we public safety and what I call them, what he calls second responders, I call the public safety adjacent folks. So, critical infrastructure and disaster management support type stuff. But for us, it's really just a calling. I mean, it's definitely not always the sexiest part of the drone industry, not always the most lucrative part of the drone industry, but it's definitely the part that I think makes the most impact, and that's what's most important to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I want to transition into DFR, because I think that's kind of a hot topic at the moment. And I want to, when we looked at drones, I'm going to say in the past, in the last couple of years, especially for public safety, they were used as a secondary tool to provide eye in the sky for the people on the ground, right? And that's what DroneSense has been doing, right? They've been using the drones to share information with everyone in the team. Matt, maybe you can explain, how did you guys go into the DFR direction? Was it something that was pretty natural and saying, okay, now we can use drones as first responders, aka we're going to send a drone to the scene, gather information before anybody gets there? Was that something pretty natural that you had planned for a long time and then just kind of eventually build into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that, we've been doing this over 8 years now, and we probably have worked with more agencies than any one, sort of consultant group in the country. And what we started to see probably about 4 years in, when we were starting to get real adoption, was that, both big agencies and small agencies were having the same problem. The big agency, the big city groups, they didn't have enough drones. They didn't have enough pilots. And so the chances that a drone would be where they needed it to be, when they needed it to be, were slim to none. The small agencies were having the same problem, which is that they may have had enough drones, but they didn't have enough people. And so you look at something like, a volunteer fire department, they need 7 people just to fight a 1-alarm fire. And now we're asking, they only have 5. And now we're asking them to take one of those 5 and put them on a drone. And so they weren't getting a lot of adoption. And so we started to realize that it can't be the first responder that's actually flying the drone. That's not going to be the most effective way to do this. And so, we saw pretty good adoption in those sort of, big city adjacent communities that had, good budgets and lots of help. But in the big cities and the small areas, it wasn't getting adoption. And so we started to realize that something like DFR was going to be the answer. We were lucky enough to be included in the San Diego IPP, the Integration Partnership Program, with Chula Vista Police Department as they started their drone first responder program. We wrote all of the FAA regulatory paperwork for that. And I think that program at this point speaks for itself. I mean, it's been going for 3 years now, and they've done over 11,000 responses with that aircraft as of, I think, yesterday when I looked. And that's like 20 times more drone flights than any of my other clients combined. And the data is astounding. They're saving, having to send officers out when they don't need them. They're making arrests because the drones were there first. And their response times are like in the 2-minute range, which is unbelievable. And so, as soon as we got involved with that program and we started put 2 and 2 together, we're like, this is it. This is the future of where this is going. And the current model, everybody's doing the best they can. But there's limits. It's not scalable when you have to have, police officers and firefighters basically step away from another duty to fly the drone. It just doesn't happen as often as we would like.
Yeah. And Ryan, I guess same question for you. Was that kind of a logical transition to build a software to eventually do DFR?
Yeah, it was. It's something that we had talked about actually about the time I started. they had already been talking about it. I mean, it's watching Chula Vista and the amazing wins they've had. That's I think very inspiring. And we all know that there's more that a drone can do, whether it's delivery or agricultural. There's more that drones can do. We waited though for a couple of years to begin this because of the restrictions. The IPP was working, but nobody else was able to do this. And as that began to loosen up, and as frankly, as we had dozens of our customers coming to us and saying, we really want to do this. At some point you say, okay, it's time to dive in. So we did. And I think that it's, similar to what Matt was saying, when we watch the response times, if you look at, for instance, Collier County, was the first operational group on DroneSense Remote. They're averaging less than 90 seconds response times. And those are statistics that, it's of course it sounds fast. It's less than a minute and a half. It's there. But if you look at average response times for agencies across the country, it's really, fast agencies are 4 or 5 minutes. Some places it's going to be 10 or more minutes, depending on traffic conditions and other. And what we know is that research indicates video is a very powerful situational force for law enforcement or for fire rescue. Anyone who's walking into a scene, a single frame of a video can change the outcome from life or death. So I think for us that, we kind of got pulled into this by our customers. It's really cool and we love doing it, but we never want to do something. We never want to get ahead of our customers. We want to make sure that this is something they can actually use. And the answer now is they can.
That's awesome. We've spoken to a few first responders in the year or so that now we've been doing the show, and it's awesome to hear these stories. Just for the people in our audience, and I'm not sure to which of you I need to direct this question, but can you give us a sense of how big the first responder community is in the United States, and what percentage of them use drones and have a drone program in place, if you know?
Yeah, I've got that data, Ryan. I don't know if I'm sure you've got it as well too, but it's somewhere in the order of 40 to 50,000 agencies across the country between police and fire. And I think organizations like Bard College and drone responders are trying to keep track of how many are using them. And the latest numbers I saw were, in the 2,500 or so programs, which is less than 10%, obviously. So, it's or is that less than 1%? I'm terrible at math. So I was told there was going to be no math in this podcast, but 2,500 out of 50,000 is not a great,
5%. No, it's not much.
There you go. 5%. Okay, good. Yeah.
No, it's not much.
But, and I think there's quite a bit more than that aren't being tracked yet. I think there are a lot of agencies that are operating programs that aren't registered and aren't, FAA authorized and things like that. And that's the nature of the beast. But yeah, it's not a lot. And I think everybody's realized at this point, hey, this is something we need to do. But there's several factors that prevent adoption.
Yeah, that's kind of my next question, I guess, is, if you see the stories about how people's lives are being saved with the help of drones, like those stories, I know some examples where you have 200 or 300 volunteers looking for a young child in a cornfield, and then the drone pilot comes in, and within seconds they locate the kids. Meanwhile, they had been searching for hours, and the night is setting in. So there are so many examples where the added value of a drone is so crystal clear that I'm wondering, okay, if we're stuck at 5%, what does it take to get all these agencies a drone program? What's the holdup? Is it regulation? Is it funding? Is it technology? Where is the biggest friction, let's say?
Yes, it's all of those things. It's a combination of those things.
Yeah, personnel.
Honestly, yeah, I think there's a lot of, and I'm sure Ryan has a lot of thoughts on this also, but there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding about, what it really takes to start a drone program. It is not as simple as going out to a big box store and buying a drone. It's definitely not that simple, but it's also not it's not super complicated either. There are, I sort of like to break it down for people as there are 4 things that you really need to consider: is what aircraft you're going to buy, how you're going to get trained, how you're going to get certified, and then what other stuff you need, which is primarily software. And if you think through those 4 things, and there's a way to start a drone program for under $10,000. there's a way to get 3 or 4 pilots trained, get Part 107 certified. If you want to go the COA route, you can do that later. We can talk all day about that. But the point is that, you can start fairly easily. Recurrent training is always a factor because everybody's busy. But the barrier to entry is getting lower and lower and lower every day in a good way. That's not usually a good statement. But the drones are getting less expensive. The software is getting less expensive. The training's getting more ubiquitous. The FAA stuff is getting easier in some respects. Not so much on the DFR side yet, but we'll talk through that, I'm sure. But it's coming, and there's ways to do it. And we try to encourage adoption, not necessarily from Skyfire or DroneSense or anybody else, but whatever you can do to get a drone in first responders' hands, it's worth it.
Yeah. And as Matt said, absolutely, it's all of those factors. There's also an additional factor that I've seen around inspiration for its use. The best programs that we see are almost always led by somebody with some sort of inspiration around how to use a drone effectively. There's an operational use case that matters, or several use cases that matter to them, and they're dogged about using the drone, making sure the drone is with them at all times. And so what we see across agencies is the ones that are very effective often have at least a core of officers or responders that, man, they've got that drone with them all the time. So when they do have I can think of a couple of good examples. One was a customer of ours, one of our very first customers, had a fleeing suspect. It was a hit and run. They ran out of the car and they took off in a cornfield. And of course, this person had the drone with them. And so they were able to find him. Even though he'd run a mile by the time they'd found him, they never would have found him without a drone. So I think part of it is just, also having the eye on the prize. And we could also talk about the law of diffusion. You look at innovation, you always have a few early adopters way off on one side. And then it takes a while to get the majority engaged in a new technology. And so I think we see that happening as more of these use cases come out, these wins are publicized. We'll continue to see greater and greater adoption within these programs.
So you mentioned $10,000 for a drone program that would include getting the actual drone, getting people trained, getting software, I guess, as well. That doesn't sound like a terribly large number. I mean, you would imagine that most first responder agencies should be able to make that happen. What does it take? Like, what are the options that first responder agencies have to fund a drone program like this?
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge in general. Yep. I would say, on the fire side, a lot of things in the fire service are funded by grants, and a lot of those grants are specifically exclude drone purchases or have in the past. I think that's changing, and I think fire departments are getting more creative about how they approach these things. On the law enforcement side, it's a different story. The Homeland Security grants have always had provisions for drones. And then I've seen things as crazy as like sheriff's departments using commissary funds from the prison. So they're using like prisoners' M&M money to buy drone programs. Yeah. I've seen asset forfeiture money. Awesome. We've seen it all. Pancake breakfasts, there's all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
But the grant thing, it was sort of getting better. And then now we have this issue with Chinese manufactured aircraft and grant money from federal sources, which is a whole other topic of conversation. But it's getting a little trickier again. But I think if you can, you think about the value that drone has, and as Ryan's point, you have to have people who are really excited about it and really champion it. But the other thing that I've seen really be a catalyst for drone programs is an incident that went poorly. And so you see a child who's drowned, or somebody who has escaped and then went on to hurt somebody. Those things can often incite departments to say, hey, you know what, we need this technology. But yeah, I mean, as I said, it seems fairly simplistic, but you get a small DJI aircraft for $1,000 or $2, and you go get a Part 107, certificate for 2 or 3 guys, and you go do some training with you guys, at Pilot Institute, or you come see us at Skyfire and get some basic training there. That's enough to get you started. And if you have 1 or 2 good wins, that typically gets more funding for that program.
Yeah. Now, I can imagine that the agencies that operate in large cities like New York, Boston, Atlanta, I mean, the budgets are on a different scale. But for your average first responder agency, like, do you have any sense of how big of a budget they typically work with for 1 year?
Well, that's the other factor here, too, is a lot of these agencies, what we've seen is that this becomes a project, not a program. And when it's billed as a project, that's hey, look, we might be able to get you $30,000 or $40,000. Go start this thing, knock yourself out, make a great drone program. But until it gets actually scheduled as a budget line item for recurrent stuff, and that means recurrent training, updates to batteries, new software licenses, things like that, it typically doesn't really explode until it gets listed as a recurring budget item. But all that to say as well, Ryan and I have a mutual friend and customer who shall remain nameless, who is a large city police department, and they still have one person and several drones, and they're operating quite regularly, but their budget wasn't huge either. And I think it really doesn't. The number doesn't matter so much as it does the commitment to the program and to sustaining it, I would say. Ryan, I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, you're right on, Matt. The thing that we see though is like anything else. If you're going to invest in something, it could be really any. You're going to invest in some technology as a company or an agency, and then you see a return on that investment. Suddenly it becomes a lot easier to commit to longer and larger programs. And that's, I think, what happens is we see the agencies that move into these long-term commitments with their people, with their technology, software and hardware. They become very successful. There's a certain moving past those initial phases with just collecting a video and showing that it works, moving into having everybody fully certified and trained, recurrent training. And those are all big investments, because what we know is that, at least on the law enforcement side, probably 9 out of 10, I think is the research I've seen, 9 out of 10 departments are understaffed. They have major gaps in their staffing. So it's hard to get those people out for training. But I think, as Matt was saying, what happens is the more they fly, the more effective they are. They move from project into program of record, and it becomes a kind of a self-sustaining program.
Yeah.
So do you think DFR, I'm trying to find a term for non-DFR activity, everything else, right? The drone just being deployed like this. So do you think DFR as a concept is more palatable for those agencies? It's something that maybe has more return on investment in the long run. And if so, why is DFR so important? What are the big benefits of DFR?
So from my perspective, yes, DFR is going to become a gateway to bring people into drone programs. And that's because as Matt was saying, you have Chula Vista flying thousands of missions per year. We have large agencies that are flying many thousands of missions per year, but it's that repetition ultimately that breeds success. And I think that with a DFR program, it's enough of an investment. You're saying, I'm going to train people, I'm going to have the right hardware, the right software, everything I need to complete this mission. And you have almost instantaneous results. You may carry a drone with you for a year and you just never happen to be there at the right time, the right place to actually have the win. So when you take one drone, statistically, it's not as likely to have a big impact. Whereas a rooftop operated drone in a reasonably dense populated area, there will be crime, there will be some kind of law enforcement or public safety event in that area. And you're going to be the first one on scene, you're going to show the value, and that's going to kick the whole thing off. The challenge, of course, is DFR is one of the more complex things you can do with a drone. So I don't know, I'd kick it over to you, Matt, and kind of talk about that.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. I think that, first of all, I think DFR scares people a little bit right now, particularly because of the FAA piece of it. And to be honest with you, Ryan and I have had this issue for a long time where, we're sort of waiting on the FAA to get to this point where this becomes a little bit more systematic. I will tell you that just in the last 2 weeks, there's been quite a bit of progress, and we'll be talking about that a lot going forward. But we've had 3 programs in the last in the last several weeks that have been approved for BVLOS. But I would also say that that's not necessarily, a showstopper. Even if you aren't doing BVLOS, there's plenty that can be done within line of sight. All of that said, like you said, Ryan, I mean, DFR is definitely a more complex undertaking, and just in coordination. But yeah, you're definitely more likely to have that kind of success. The one thing I will say too, and this is sort of my vision for it, and Ryan, you and I have never really talked about this before, but I see this as a regional approach to drone response. There's a lot of agencies. I mean, I live in Huntsville, Alabama now, but I spent 20 years in Atlanta. And in the Atlanta metro area, there's probably 75 different agencies. At least 5 of them are talking about starting DFR programs. And to me, I'm like, why reinvent the wheel? Like, if we can get over this whole cross-jurisdictional, thing that we've got going on and say, hey, look, this drone is on a rooftop and maybe it's right on the edge of the city line, but we could also fly into your jurisdiction and get you data. This is a really cool way to regionalize drone response. And I think that's what we're really targeting is not just my little castle and my little kingdom, but how can we help everybody around us too?
You talked about the FAA being a bit of a challenge. What's the difficulty with the FAA approving these programs? Is it the drones not being shown as being reliable just yet, flying over people, flying over moving vehicle? Is it the beyond visual line of sight issue with the drones not having sensors that can avoid the sense and avoid sensors on the drone? What's the main thing that you see with the FAA where they're like, ooh, hold on, we're going to take this slowly?
This is a bit of a minefield, Greg. So I'm gonna tread lightly here, but Haya, I don't know. Are you a manned aircraft pilot as well?
No, I'm not a manned aircraft pilot.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. So 3 out of the 4 of us are manned aircraft pilots, and we understand that there is a real risk here to drones getting in the way, particularly when we're taking off or landing from an airport, and for those that are helicopter pilots as well. And ultimately, that is the FAA's concern, right? It's our responsibility as pilots to see and avoid other aircraft, and so they have not been convinced in a way that is to their liking that drones can do that appropriately. Now, there's a lot of work being done in that area, both on the software side, on the hardware side. I think manned aircraft pilots are starting to get used to the idea of drones, but ultimately, the FAA is doing their best to keep our airspace the safest airspace in the world, because it is, and they want to keep it that way, while trying to allow this stuff for public safety and, of course, for commercial entities too. I mean, we all can't wait for the day where Amazon drops a package off on our front lawn with a drone, but we have to do that safely, and we have to do that. Well, yeah, maybe. I guess it depends. You may stand somewhere different on that issue, but
it's a whole show in itself.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So yeah, I think that I understand the concern. I really do. And like I said, being behind the yoke of an airplane, I get the concern. I think that the FAA is working to try and find ways to make it easier for public safety agencies to do this. And typically, I can just kind of walk you through the evolution here, which was when we started with Chula Vista, it was you need to have a visual observer on the roof and they need to be able to see 3 miles. They don't have to see the aircraft, but they do have to see the airspace. Then we sort of morphed into, well, you have to have a VO and a pilot in command on the roof, and you have to be able to still see 3 miles. So now all of a sudden we've got 2 police officers standing on a roof. And then in this last round of approvals, what we're starting to see is 2 miles instead of 3 miles, but with this sort of concept of daisy chaining visual observers. And so as long as a visual observer can see 2 miles around the aircraft, it almost isn't as much of a concern where the takeoff point was. It's better. It's not great. It still took over 6 months, and it's a work in progress. And I think, until we have drones that, we are 100% sure are going to see and avoid, until UTM, Unmanned Traffic Management, is a reality, remote ID is still coming online. All of those things kind of, play together to make a safer airspace picture for us. And it will get better.
I was going to ask. Is this the answer? Is the rest of the UTM concept being put in place? Is that what we're waiting for? Or is the industry a bit too early, or the FAA a little bit too late in the implementation? Is that what we're waiting for to get there?
I'll let you take that one, Ryan. I did enough talking on this subject, I think. Yeah, I don't need an FAA inspector
That's
showing up out there.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. That's
yeah, no problem.
I appreciate that.
We're cutting to commercials.
So I already mentioned I've got a younger brother. I also have an older sister. I'm a middle child, so you're going to get the diplomatic response from me, and it really is around. FAA has this duty to protect this airspace, and we were talking about police offices or fire departments investing in a drone program. They want to make sure that A, that their money is going somewhere, B, that it's actually going to contribute to their picture and be safe, and C, that you're not going to do anything harmful with a drone. That is also a concern, that you're out there distracting people. And I have seen drones misused in operational circumstances where they do create a distraction. What we have seen on the DroneSense side is realistically the most likely interaction you're going to have between a drone and an aircraft in a public safety operation is probably with a contributing crewed aircraft. It's probably going to be one of your helicopters that you end up connecting with because you're both trying to work the same scene. At 150 feet or 200 feet, I'm a fixed wing pilot, so I mean I'm below my lowest mins by the time I'm that low. But I think in public safety operations, we know of operations, particularly in Texas, where you have drones above rotor wing aircraft. So in DroneSense, we've taken the tact of, well, we want to pull those manned assets into our application as well. So you can fly with an Android device or an iOS device and see the location and altitude of that helicopter or fixed wing aircraft as a part of your overall operational picture. So we were talking about that big Austin exchange. Well, there were helicopters involved, and of course you're going to have one of those devices in each helicopter, so that's part of your overall situational picture. So what is that? It's kind of our own little microcosm of UTM. We recognize the absolute importance of being able to deconflict from cooperative and non-cooperative aircraft. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to demonstrate to the FAA that you can do it safely. In fact, if you talk to Lieutenant Ayana down at Brookhaven, he'll tell you number one thing is get out there and start safely operating. Demonstrate to the FAA that you can do this effectively and safely, that you're not a cowboy. No offense to anybody. I got to be careful. Most of our companies in Texas. That's not a bad thing, cowboys, for anybody listening. But it's very important that we demonstrate absolute professionalism. I know Matt, kind of discusses this a lot, and we sure do too. When we talk with customers, and as our reach has grown, we need to fly really safely and really effectively, so that the FAA will continue to trust us more with these operations.
Well, and I think that this is another benefit of DFR is that if you have one person or one group of people that are all they're responsible for is flying these drones, they're going to take it more seriously than the guy or the gal who has the drone in the backseat of their cruiser and says, "Oh, let me throw that up real quick and just see what." That's not their job, right? Their job is to fight the fire or chase the bad guy or whatever. But if it's your job to be on a rooftop all day long operating this, then you're going to know what you're doing. So that's another sort of side benefit of the DFR model.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw the hand grenade and then just leave. But how about you mentioned remote ID? Is remote ID really going to help with this situation? And I'm talking about manned aircraft versus unmanned aircraft separation. Remote ID is not going to be in manned aircraft. It will help probably the rest of people on the ground, and probably you at DroneSense. I'm guessing, Ryan, remote ID will help. But what's your thought? Maybe both of you on that.
From our perspective, yeah, remote ID will help. Of course, we're a software company, Greg, so we sure wish there was a remote ID for the software side. So if I were to say that this is one area where I think that software can help an awful lot. It reduces, I'm not saying that it replaces a hardware solution, but software really can help. A software remote ID solution, I think could help contribute to a very comprehensive picture of what's going on. Things like ADS-B. Yep. Exactly.
Situational awareness.
ADS-B, if it was more complete in the sense that, of course, any aircraft you're flying, Greg, I'm sure has ADS-B at this point. I know mine, the aircraft I've been flying does. But there are, since there are these exclusions, you can't 100% rely on it. And I think that's a huge challenge for us, all of us in the drone industry. For if we could just have complete remote ID and complete ADS-B coverage, I do think that begins to really make some of these deconfliction opportunities really, really feasible.
Yep. So I'm going to throw another hand grenade. Should all aircraft be mandated to have ADS-B, since all unmanned aircraft are going to be mandated to have remote ID?
Now you're really putting me in a pickle here, because
I mean, I do ask myself these questions all the time. It is tough because it's an expensive solution, right? But if we're trying to really integrate everyone in the airspace, is it really the only solution that will solve
ADS-B
that?
is really tough for certain operators. There are military and law enforcement operations that just cannot have that level of visibility. So in my mind, there's always going to be some kind of cutout, but there needs to be a solution for that, so that, okay, if ADS-B is not turned on, perhaps there's some other way of alerting aircraft to that presence. I don't know, Matt. Since I've been taking most of the hits here, what do you think?
Hey, I took a couple for the team here. Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that, actually, Ryan, because as I said, I live in Huntsville, and this is kind of the northern Alabama is kind of the home of Army aviation. And so there is a lot of stuff flying around out here that is not on ADS-B, and it does concern me. I fly out of Redstone Arsenal, when the flying club that I'm in. And so I'm sort of used to being around all these aircraft that aren't on ADS-B, and radar coverage is good. But from a drone perspective, yeah, I mean, if I'm out in a field and I'm looking on FlightAware or by any ForeFlight or anything like that, I don't see that stuff. And so yeah, that's always going to be a limitation. But I also think that there are things like Blackhawks flying around here. They're pretty loud, so you have to use your other senses. That does get concerning, though, when you talk about remote operation. So if I'm inside in a command center and I'm flying something, I can't hear the Black Hawk flying overhead. So I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know the answer there. I think there's, like Ryan said, there's just some people who can't broadcast where they are at all times. So
a lot of challenges when it comes to using drones. I don't know if this question is going to be much easier, and feel free to jump in to answer it. But I know, for instance, from Boston as well as from LA, when they were launching their drone programs, a lot of people in the community were voicing their concerns about privacy. Can you guys share some insights there, and perhaps some best practices as to how you deal with community concerns and privacy concerns when you're launching a drone program?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that one to start. And, I think one of the things that we've talked to almost every one of our programs about is be transparent about what you're doing, and more importantly, what you're not doing. Ryan, you mentioned Lieutenant Ayana from Brookhaven Police in Atlanta. From the beginning, they went out to the community and said, we are starting a DFR program. This is what that means. We are not going to be patrolling. We're not flying overhead looking for crime. We're only responding to a request for help. So you've already called 911, and you should expect some police presence. They are also making it very clear that they're not looking in windows, and they're not looking at sunbathers out by the pool. The other thing that they did that I thought was really interesting was they actually took their drone policy and they went directly to the ACLU and said, take a look at this and tell us what problems you have with it, and let's fix that beforehand. There are other programs, particularly on the law enforcement side, where they have said, we don't really want to tell people what we're doing. I said, well, that's going to cause problems for you later on. The amount of Freedom of Information Act requests you're going to get, and the amount of video you're going to have to produce. So I think being transparent is key. We see a lot less of these concerns on the fire rescue side. You mentioned LA. The LA Fire and LA Police were starting drone programs at the same time. LA Police had a huge public relations disaster with theirs. Meanwhile, LA Fire was out doing what they needed to do. And so, working together between those agencies, I think, is also critical. And just getting people to understand that, the limitations of the technology. If I'm 400 feet over the top of your house, I can't see in your bedroom window, nor do I want to be. But the technology doesn't see through walls, and it doesn't see through roofs, and yes, thermal cameras can do certain things like see heat signatures, but by the very physics of thermal imaging, you can't see through glass. And so, explaining those things to people, letting them see the drones, letting them see that they're not, they don't have missiles, underneath them or guns or anything like that. But this is the perception of drones that people have. And so I think there's a lot to be said for walking that back.
We spoke with Chula Vista some time ago, and they showed us how they share every individual drone flight in a database so that people can actually just, from the citizens there or the residents, they can just log in and just check out those flights. Is that the way to go, to just basically put all those flights out there for people to look at and to scrutinize?
Ryan, you probably have more experience with that than I do, but I know the programs that do that, I think, have very few, if any, complaints.
Yeah, I think it is a best practice. Now, there are certain agencies for whom that's not going to make a lot of sense. But if you talk to Vern, of course, he kind of helped start that program at Chula Vista, and he's now with our partner Axon. If you talk to Vern, it is amazing that kind of transparency, the trust that builds with your community. And for law enforcement in particular, trust is a absolutely precious commodity. Hard to build, really easy to lose. So privacy is part of that. And I think that, the thing I'll add about privacy is that there's always a tension between, in social media or in use of, if you have a phone, you have this challenge, this tension between privacy and convenience. For public safety, it's a tension between privacy and situational awareness. Those two things can be at loggerheads at times. And that's where selecting the right technology is so key. You could get almost all the same benefits and perhaps some more by putting fixed cameras all across your city. If you had unlimited funding and could put thousands of fixed cameras all over, looking at every street and every house and every backyard of the entire city, you could get all the benefits of the DFR programs that we talk about. But wide area surveillance like that doesn't do a whole lot to build trust, and it certainly invades a lot of privacy. The beautiful thing about a DFR program is that it's a soda straw. It's a powerful zoom camera, generally on a very capable aircraft, but it's being dispatched to an ongoing scene. It's an exigent circumstance that draws it to that location. It's only looking there. And so you replace wide area surveillance with a soda straw, only providing that situational awareness in the place that it matters. And I think on the backside, accountability is so key. So what Chula Vista is doing is absolutely best practice. It lends a sense of accountability. If you continue to fly to the same place, someone who lives there can look that up and say, why are you flying around my house? And you can, form a complaint that way. So I think you're right. It is a best practice.
So that kind of brings me to the next question. Like, with all these different agencies now having drone programs in place, like, how do you measure the value or the success of a drone program? Like, what's the most convincing arguments that we have basically to show how valuable drones are?
One of the things, and I just had this conversation with an agency the other day, is trying to measure the cost savings that they've had because of the drone. But that's always tricky because, we don't have good enough data to be able to say, because I had the drone there first, or because I had the drone there at all, I was able to, respond with 1 alarm instead of 2 alarms, or I was able to get 3 officers there instead of 10. And I think agencies are starting to look at how to track that data. And so I think that's one way to do it. And certainly when you're talking to, accounting departments and procurement departments, cost savings is always going to be the best way to get them to spend money on something. And so that data is important. We certainly don't want to boil it down to just cost, but also lives saved too. I mean, there's countless stories.
Yeah.
And there have been, honestly, since the early days of when we started this. Every week I'm getting a text from somebody going like, hey, look at what we did this week. Or, hey, we were able to, there's a perfect example that we saw recently out of Atlanta. A client of both of ours flew a drone into an apartment with a barricaded gunman who was wanted for murder. The drone was able to back the suspect out safely. And the SWAT team never went in there, so they weren't putting their lives in danger. And the suspect wasn't in danger because there were no guys with guns in there. And so that's a success. Let the robot do the work, right? I mean, bomb teams have known this for a long time. Instead of putting a guy in a, Stave Puff marshmallow suit and putting their life in danger, let the robot go in and figure out what's going on first before you start sending people in there. And I think that's how you measure success of these programs.
That's what you were talking about, Ryan, right? With this de-escalation we talked before the show.
That's right. It's really it's also all about the things you don't end up having to do in person.
Yeah.
If you send the robot to do it instead, the classic thing. If you talk to Sergeant Baker down in Collier County, he's been operating a significant percentage of the calls that the drone is dispatched on. They're able to clear just with the drone. Chula Vista and Brookhaven, of course, are doing the same thing. So they're out there and they're able to prevent someone even from driving to that location. Each time an officer drives somewhere, it's a certain cost. There's fuel and wear and tear. There's also danger of simply just driving through the streets. So that's a big part of it. But I think that the de-escalation component is probably, at least in my opinion, the most not only culturally important for us as a society to have safer interactions between public safety and communities, but this is also just an opportunity to make those interactions more pleasant. If somebody's able to see that video as they're approaching a scene, they can see it just a bunch of kids out there fooling around. They can have a different presence as they walk into that scene. If they just hear the screaming, and that's all they've got, there's going to be a different level of response as they approach the scene. So de-escalation, allowing officers and communities to make really wise decisions in these very challenging moments is, I think, that is the reason for drones and specifically for DFR.
Yeah. And I think it's also difficult sometimes to say, well, we didn't lose an officer because we had a drone, because, well, nothing happened. So how do you show that nothing happened when, right? It's always difficult to show the proof right there. Now, I want to transition real quick, and we're getting towards the end of the interview, unfortunately, because we've talked about some amazing stuff, but I want to talk about the drones themselves that are being used for DFR. What are the specs per se? And I'm not looking for brand or anything, but what is needed to have to make a good drone for DFR?
I guess by Matt's silence, I'm going to answer this one. From my perspective, a good drone for drone as a first responder program, first of all, it has to be all weather capable. It's got to have a good zoom lens. It has to be safe and reliable. The connectivity has to be extraordinary. We're asking these drones to fly much farther than they would in normal operations. So it's a combination of reliability and safety and just power. It's got to be a powerful experience flying a drone in this kind of environment. But ultimately, as we talked about at the very beginning, the thing that matters is getting video to people that need it. So it's got to be a good camera, and you have to have a good connection.
Yeah, and the only other thing
that makes
Matt, I agree with all that. The only other thing I would add to that is battery life and endurance. You're flying distances further than we're used to. And so it's great if you have a great camera and great connection, but if you get on scene and you can only stay there for 2 minutes before you have to come back, that's a big limitation. So, there's been a lot of talk about, autonomously recharging drones, hydrogen fuel cell drones, gas powered drones, better batteries. I think all of those things are on the docket. But, one of the things in general that I've always said, is that the drone itself doesn't matter so much. It's really all about the sensor that you put on it and whatever you're doing to process that data. And I think that's the key, right? All we're doing is offering perspective. Yep. So that's all this aircraft is doing. And if you buy the latest and greatest, or you got an old reliable workhorse, it doesn't matter so much as long as you have the right sensor and the right software to process it and a way to see it. I think that's the most important thing.
So a few years ago, they introduced the BlueUAS program, a government program that basically promotes the use of drones that are made or assembled in the United States. The drones in that program have gotten some critique that their capabilities were limited, perhaps that their pricing was extraordinarily high. If you compare that with the budgets that we're working with, and we're saying, okay, it's $10,000 that it takes to basically start a basic drone program. Is BlueUAS the answer, or are the DJI and the hotel drones so much less expensive, so much more capable that we really should be able to use Chinese-made drones?
This is another minefield we're walking into, so this is great.
A little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a good question though. I mean, I think the spirit of BlueUAS is right. I think we should be using stuff that's made here. Look, whether do I think that the Chinese government is spying on every drone that it's got in the air? No. I think there's a political component to that. But I do think it's important to support American industry and build stuff here. I think the reality of the situation is the American drone industry, drone manufacturing industry is like 3-4 years old, right? The defense drone industry in America is 25, 30 years old. And so there's a lot of catching up to do. And I mentioned in the beginning, we're making our own aircraft. It's been a really uphill battle, to get the right sensors, the right stuff, the right integration, the right software, the right ground stations. That's all really a challenge because it's still fresh, right? And you still can't get motors that are made in America. There are pieces and parts that we have to get from China. Batteries, are another good example. And so, yeah, I agree that something needed to be done. I think BlueUAS is a little bit limited. And the fact that now we're way into the weeds here, but the fact that you can't list a drone on the GSA schedule that's not on the blue list is problematic. Pardon me, because only so many of us can get on the blue list, and there's other stuff that goes along with that. But I think the idea is right. I think, to be honest with you, there's a large percentage of departments that are going to be flying Chinese aircraft for a very long time. Things like what's happening in Florida, where they're being banned from using those aircraft, I think too much too soon. I think an adoption period is really important there. But yeah, I mean, look, as an American drone manufacturer, we are doing the best we can to get the best product out. It's just been, I forgot the whole, 2 years of global pandemic and supply chain shortages and all that kind of stuff too. You add all of that on top of it, whatever progress was being made has been hampered that much more. So it's a tough nut to crack right now. And there is no great answer. And if a department says to me, hey, I've got 10 grand to spend on a drone, do I go American or do I go Chinese? If you don't have a restriction on that money, I'd buy Chinese. And I say that as somebody who makes a drone, because they're better, they're more researched, they're well worn, they're less expensive, and if you can, go for it. Is my opinion.
Yeah, my thoughts on that, of course, are very similar. Seems like we're well aligned, Matt. That's convenient for this talk. But I think the truth is that each model of drone has its utility. Nobody set out to make a bad drone in any of these environments. They're designed for a specific thing. The original Blue List was designed for a particular Army program, and each of those performed really well for that for that program. That's why they were selected. And sometimes those requirements match up really well for customers. At DroneSense, or with Axon Air powered by DroneSense, we provide security either way. And we can. That's another show altogether where we talk about security and and how that can be achieved. The correct amount of security for the right operation. But the number one thing is that each of those drones have their utility. There's a design point for each, and we know customers out there that are flying many different varieties of BlueUAS as well as Chinese drones extremely effectively. So, I think each department needs to look at their own needs and figure out, what combination of camera, drone platform, source of point of origin works for me, and then work with a company like SkyFire or DroneSense to get the absolute most out of it.
Makes sense. So my last question of the show, and this is a quick fire question, 1 minute or less. Look in your crystal ball. Where are we going to be in 5 years as far as technology and drone use for public safety?
DFR, DFR for the win. This is where it's all heading. I think, the FAA permissions are going to get easier to achieve. I think the drones themselves may improve some, but honestly, the big improvements are going to come in the power, the batteries, the software, the integration. And I think, the only way that this can go is DFR, right? There's just not enough people and there's not enough training in the world to make sure that a drone is there on every call unless you're doing it using DFR. And so, that's why we're very much committed to DFR as a concept. We are actually, the future of our company is we'd like to, offer DFR as a service, so that you don't even have to have your pilots, your police officers sweating on the rooftop. Let us do that for you. And I think that that's going to become more popular. We're already seeing it in Chula Vista and other places. And so I think that's where this is all heading in 5 years. And hopefully we can get there more quickly and more safely than 5 years.
Yep. Yeah, it's DFR, and I think it's going to be drone in a box, where we have drones without people on rooftops staged around cities and regions, and those operations are going to be fully collaborative. So it won't be a law enforcement DFR solution; it's going to be a whole of city response solution. So whether it's a fire or it's a law enforcement scene, so I think it's going to be this. Fewer people involved, less staffing required, and a much more powerful overall meshed operation.
Makes sense.
Very interesting. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate your time and coming on the show to talk about this. I think this was very insightful. We'll roll this back in 5 years. We'll call you back and see if your prediction was correct. But
just how wrong we were.
All right. Well, this is all we have. We'll put links down in the description if you want to find more information about Skyfire or DroneSense. And then in the meantime, we'll see you guys at the next drone show somewhere, I'm sure.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.